Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Open to Export webinar about export controls and licensing requirements during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am the Senior Content Editor at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Just a quick note to say that we are all dialing in from home as per social distancing advice, so if there is any lag at any point due to home Wi-Fi's, please do bear with us. Next slide, please. Open to Export is a free online service helping small businesses get ready to sell overseas through our step-by-step articles and guides, regular webinars, our export action plan tool, and our quarterly competitions. You can find out about all of these on our website at www.opentoexport.com. Next, please. Open to Export is powered by the Institute of Export and International Trade, the UK's professional membership body for traders. Endorsed by the World Trade Organization and the International Chamber of Commerce as a small business champion, we offer a unique range of individual and business membership benefits, education and training catering for beginners through to master's degrees, and an exciting and prestigious program of events celebrating UK businesses' exporting achievements. Next, please. The Institute has moved online during the pandemic, offering a range of support and telephone assistance, including online training courses and export masterclasses, international trade surgeries, which can be conducted over the phone, online qualifications provided by the Institute and the UK Customs Academy, a technical helpline for exporters, daily bulletins bringing you all the key trade stories, and of course the free articles and webinars on the Open to Export platform. With the government indicating that it's looking to press on with ending the transition period at the end of 2020, we do recommend you continue your Brexit preparations, especially as many of the Institute's relevant courses are still fully fundable by government grants. You can find out more information about our support on export.org.uk, and please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Next, please. We will be running a live Q&A later in the session, and you can ask questions at any point using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. The general principle here is that we will adopt is that we will only ask questions that are relevant to the broader audience, so we won't be able to go into company specifics as such. If you do have specific questions, we can refer you to our technical helpline afterwards. We'll also avoid speculative or political questions, and we've had a note from the other speakers to say they'll be happy to answer some of the questions we don't get to today offline afterwards. You can also download a PDF of the slides at any point via the handout drop-down on your control panel, and you will be able to watch a recording of this webinar on opentoexport.com/webinars within a day of it finishing. Next, please. Now, before handing over to our speakers, we're going to do a few polls today, beginning with a first question, which is just getting a gauge on what people are looking to gain or to learn from today's webinar. The options there are UK general regulatory changes, UK regulations on PPE, worldwide regulations on PPE, the export control profession and IOE response to COVID-19, or other. While letting you answer that question, I will briefly speak on our speakers today. We have Claire Harrison and Matthew Allen from the Department of International Trade's Export Control Joint Unit, and Roger Arfi will be kicking off in a second, who is the chair of the Institute's Export Control Profession Board. Hi Roger, Claire and Matthew. I'm just going to let people have a few more seconds to answer this question. Excellent, I'm going to close that now. And here are the results. So 51% are just here for a update on kind of what's happening on a UK regulatory level. We do have a fair few people who come in interested in what's going on with PPE, both on a UK level and a worldwide level, and a few people as well interested in the control profession and the Institute of Export's response to the pandemic. But on that note, I think I shall, if you can move to the next slide, I shall now hand over to Roger Arfi. Over to you, Roger.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be speaking to you. Would you like to go to the next slide, please? Okay, just briefly, the agenda for this afternoon, following introductions, I'm going to talk briefly about the export control profession because we've got a very large number of people on the call this afternoon, some of whom might not know much about it. We're then going to focus on the ECJU response to COVID-19, looking at export licensing, continuity and training courses, amongst other things. And clearly that will answer a lot of the questions that people have been signed in to be interested in. We'll also be looking at other regulatory changes in the UK and then look broader at worldwide regulatory changes. And we're going to look at some tools that are available to people who may be needing to think wider than the normal export control arrangements. At that point, we're going to talk about briefly the key role of export control specialists, because in my view, export control specialists have got a special role that they can play in the current COVID climate. And then finally, we'll look at the responses that the ECP and the IOE and IT have made to COVID-19. And then we'll have a look at some of the questions and try and answer some of them. Okay, next slide, please. So just a brief introduction to the export control profession. We've been going just short of a year now. We are the only professional body in the UK, especially for export control personnel. And we are created and led by export control specialists. We have a board of prominent people in the export control world. Our objective is to facilitate compliance with export control and sanctions regulations. We do that in two ways: promoting professional development and the professional recognition of export control staff. We do that by providing training and development opportunities, and members are recognised by the post-nominal letters, MIEXP for membership as well. We provide resources to enable increased compliance, and clearly today's webinar is one of those resources. If you want to know more, please visit at the website you see down there. If you just put in export control profession, all one word, it should come up on a search. Next slide, please. Will.
Thank you, Roger. So we're just going to do a second poll just before handing over to Claire. The poll is, which of the following applies to the types of goods you sell? The options are military, dual use, PPE, uncontrolled, which examples would be food or works of art, or other. Claire, if I can bring you on now, would you like to say a little bit more about kind of what dual use items are in general? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, William. I just about managed to click the button. So just to be clear on this one, dual use items are those items that are not designed or developed for military use, but can be used to make or incorporate into military equipment. Dual use also covers several other areas, such as chemicals and all sorts of different things. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that one. I do apologise. But it's suffice to say that all of these dual use items can be found in the strategic export control lists.
Great, thank you, Claire. I'm going to close that poll now and we'll show the results. So 39% of the people on the line today are dual use goods, 28% military. There's some PPE again, so 9% there, 7% on uncontrolled, so things like foods or works of art, and then we've got a fair few other as well. But at that point, I'll hide the poll and hand back to Claire. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much for that, William. That's been really helpful. So as you can see, what we've got up here is a background on strategic export controls, because what I thought is that as a precursor and for clarity for this particular webinar, given that I know there are a lot of non-defence companies dialing into it, and I will say that's all thanks to the work we're doing with the Institute of Export and International Trade and the Strategic Export Control profession, I thought it might be helpful if I gave a brief overview of strategic export control so you understand exactly what's covered by these types of controls. So to start with, I think I should say that the Export Control Joint Unit, who I work for and who Matt works for, is the UK's competent authority for strategic export controls. Strategic export control licenses are required for all exports of military and dual-use controlled items, technology and software. Technology is the information necessary for the design and development of controlled items and includes, but is not limited to, blueprints, technical manuals not in the public domain, and then methods of export, for instance, email, taking laptops with the information on it overseas, and other forms of transfer. So you asked me that question earlier, William, about what is dual use. So the types of areas that we have, it really is, as I said, it's items that are not designed for military but can be used for use by military users. So if you think about the range of kit that military use, things like radio communications, things like marine equipment, things like all types of computers, cyber, crypto, it includes a wide range of different things. And as I said, I think it's important to have a look at the export control list so that you can find out more about those. So having given you an overview of the types of things that are covered here, it's fair to say that licenses are required for any export of the items that are in the export control lists, and that includes permanent export and temporary export. For instance, if you're taking stuff over to exhibitions. Licenses are also required for the trade and brokering of military controlled items. So this is when you're directing movement of controlled items between countries outside the UK and the EU. So for instance, if you're asking a parent or a sister company or a supplier to service the order directly to an overseas buyer, as that's where the source of supply is. There are other controls, including military end use. Now, military end use is when you've probably got when you have got non-military controlled items, but they are going to be used by a military force overseas or the police or whatever. They're going to have a military end use, and you may not know that that's going to be used for military end use, but we'll let you know on that one. There are also controls on things like radioactive sources, nuclear equipment, chemical, and any items which have a potential use for developing weapons of mass destruction. And it's fair to say here that those types of items may not be in any control lists at all, because it's the intended use of what those items are. And then what we've got are trade sanctions and arms embargoes. So that also means that items will require licenses. And sometimes in the case of trade sanctions, these may be items that are not normally controlled. But there's quite a lot of background to all of these things. We can provide training on all of this. Details are on our gov.uk Export Control Joint Unit homepage. And one thing that I didn't mention was the bit at the bottom that talks about MOD approvals for classified equipment. So that's if you're working directly with UK MOD and designing things for military purposes that have a classification of above official sensitive. You need to get approval specifically from the MOD to do any of that. Okay, next slide, please. Now, Matt and I are going to be covering all of these areas in our presentation in the next few slides. But before I go into that, I think it needs to be said in these current times that coronavirus is the biggest threat this country's faced in decades. I think we're all in agreement with that. All over the world, we're seeing its devastating impact. DIT and all government departments will do what it takes to support UK businesses to continue trading. And the crisis is highlighting just how important it is to keep trade flowing and support chains open. There's a number of really good websites that I would encourage you to have a look at. They're all on gov.uk. There's a coronavirus business support website supported by BEIS, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And there's also a lot of collections and guidance on coronavirus, COVID-19 guidance that you can obtain also. Now, I know that we've had a lot of questions on personal protective equipment, and as we all know, it's really in the press at the moment. Roger is going to be taking time to talk about that later. But for now, I'm just going to put a marker in here that as the Department of Health and Social Care are the competent licensing authority for personal protective equipment, any advice that we give is held within their website. And their website is available on gov.uk. For those of you that are interested, I can give out the details later. So in the next few slides, Matt and I are going to be talking about actions the Export Control Joint Unit is taking to ensure business continuity in these strategic export licensing areas that I've just talked about. And we're going to be covering these areas here. The first thing you'll see there, it says notices to exporters. Our key communication route with you remains as the notices to exporters service. I urge you and your supply chains to sign up for these if you haven't already. We're working very closely with all UK business support organisations to ensure all businesses signed up as members to these are informed of actions they need to take. So please check in with your representative body and ask them for this information if you're not signed up for them. To sign up for them, you go onto gov.uk and you can easily sign up there. As a reminder, in the last few weeks, we've issued notices on these areas here, business continuity on export licensing handling, how we're dealing with compliance visits, the information on MOD authorisations, and what we've had to do with training courses. Matt will also talk later about the ongoing export control policy development during the transition period. But for now, Matt, I'm going to pass over to you because I think you're going to be reviewing the notices that we've actually issued. Next slide, please.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Claire. So this slide, as Claire said, sets out the 4 notices to exporters which we published online relating to our response to COVID-19. And before I go any further, I just want to echo what Claire said and to encourage everyone listening, if you haven't already, to sign up to receive email alerts for when these notices are published. You can find a link at the bottom of any of these notices that you see the link for. And just click where it says sign up to receive email alerts for notices to exporters and then follow the instructions on your screen. That way you'll be up to date with all the latest guidance as and when it comes out. I don't intend to talk in great detail on this slide, as that's really the purpose of the rest of this webinar, but just to explain the landscape a little bit better, I'll quickly run through each of these notices and explain a little bit about what they say. The first notice to exporters listed here was published on the 20th of March, and it set out the cancellation of export control training courses in April, May and June. The second notice was also published on the 20th of March and offered guidance about export license handling. The third notice to exporters was published on the 9th of April and updated the guidance about compliance visits. And the fourth notice to exporters that you see on your screen was published also on the 9th of April and gave some more detailed guidance about processing licensing applications during the current period. Make sure that you familiarise yourself with all 4 of these notices because together they represent the totality of the guidance that we've published relating to COVID-19. And now for the next slide, back to Claire.
You should unmute yourself, Claire.
Thank you, William. As has already been said, processing applications for strategic export control licenses is a business critical operation for the Department for International Trade. We've put in place business continuity measures to ensure licensing continues. This includes technical assessments, end-use checks and reviewing applications against our strict licensing criteria. Communications will continue via the SPIRE licensing database in the normal way. And this will also include requests for information and license decisions. You can be rest assured that all of our licensing officers are all set up to work from home in these trying times and are contactable in the normal way. The Ministry of Defence, MOD, will continue to process the Form 6 F680s, which are required for classified information that I spoke about earlier. They are there to deal with cases on Crown exemptions, and also we will continue to provide the authorisation letters for you to sign up for open general export licences. The Export Control Joint Unit inquiry line with the telephone number there will remain accessible, and inquiries can also be sent by email to our helpline exportcontrol.help@trade.gov.uk. Next slide, please. The following interim arrangements will stay in place until further notice. We've increased the response time for requests for further information on all different types of licenses from the 20 days to 40 working days. So that's increased from 20 working days to 40 working days. We've set in place arrangements to ensure that we do not require original copies of end-user stockist undertakings, and we will accept digital or electronic signatures on supporting documentation, including PDF versions of end-user undertakings and stockist undertakings. If you're exporting firearms and ammunition to EU member states, we're amending or have amended the EC3 and EC forms on gov.uk. These are now in an unlocked Word document version to enable us to add the details in box 9 and 10 electronically, and we will email the completed, signed and stamped EC3, but you will not receive a hard copy by post. You should upload Word versions of the EC3 and EC4 forms into Spire, please. The Word versions, not the PDFs as you would normally have done. For dual-use goods located in another EU member state, and for which we are required to consult those licensing authorities, we will no longer be issuing a hard copy of the licence for presentation to EU member states customs. Please print a copy of the licence from Spire with the green tick for presentation. We will accept the following types of electronic signatures on your documentation: simple electronic signatures, advanced electronic signatures, and qualified electronic signatures. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So now we turn to compliance visits. And before I say anything else, I think the first thing to reiterate is that all of the detail around this can be found in the Notice to Exporters number 2020/09. So if you miss any of this or want to refer to it at a later date in more detail, that's where you should look. The key message is that the compliance inspection programme will continue, but we've moved to remote audits rather than physical site visits as a way of meeting legislative requirements. We understand this is a difficult time for exporters and will take as pragmatic approach as possible while undertaking remote compliance checks. There are a number of practical points I want to get across about these remote compliance checks. Firstly, you should note that your remote compliance check may not take place in line with Spire records, so you should await confirmation from your compliance officer. The date for your remote check will be confirmed via calendar appointment, usually 4 to 6 weeks beforehand. Your compliance officer will also discuss with you beforehand the most suitable web platform to use for the remote check. Secondly, if your business is closed due to COVID-19, please email your compliance officer and let them know as soon as possible. There's no need to wait for a calendar appointment before getting in touch. If you're unable to access your records for any reason, you should inform your compliance officer at the time the remote compliance check has been arranged. The documentation required is outlined in the condition of your license. Please do not attempt to retrieve documents if they're located in a building which has been closed due to COVID-19. For businesses that are still exporting controlled items or who have access to their documentation, there are some actions you should take to prepare for your compliance check. We ask that you complete the required forms and pieces of documentation. In particular, these include the pre-visit questionnaire, which will be attached to the calendar invitation, and a list of exports made under your licenses for the preceding 2 years. This list of exports is a new arrangement for this period and should be returned along with the pre-visit questionnaire at least 7 working days before your remote compliance check is due to take place. We'll send a reminder about this requirement as part of the covering email with a calendar invitation. Before the remote check takes place, your compliance officer will provide as much advance notice as possible about the specific licensable exports they wish to inspect, and this request won't come any later than midday on the day before the check. On consignee undertakings, we will now accept a digital or electronic undertaking or copy in PDF form. This must also be accompanied by an email from the consignee explaining why they cannot submit an original at this time. This will be required for each undertaking presented, and if no evidence is forthcoming, you are at risk of breaching the terms and conditions of your license. If we sent your business a compliance warning letter, your compliance officer will arrange an on-site compliance check as soon as we're able to recommence site visits. There'll be no additional penalties against your business as a consequence. I recognise there's quite a lot of information to cover in one slide. Again, all of this is available to read as a notice on gov.uk. If you have specific questions about any of this, then your first port of call is your compliance officer. You can find their details on the Spire. If you haven't been allocated a compliance officer or don't know their name, please contact the email address you can see on the slides, exportcontrol.help@trade.gov.uk. Next slide, please. This slide is in a sense an extension to the previous slide concerning compliance. I wanted to make clear that although every effort is being made to ensure that MOD approvals are being processed in a timely manner, it may be that these authorization letters are delayed. Therefore, during this time, compliance officers will accept evidence of an application for MOD authorization having been made if this was prior to the shipment date and there is evidence of an email acknowledgement from the MOD team. If the records aren't available, the compliance officer will retain the right to check whether the MOD authorization letter has been issued during the next site check. Back to Claire for the next slide.
Thanks, Matt. So coming on to training courses, we did issue a notice to exporters about the action we had to take with our training courses, and it was very unfortunate that the export control training courses that were planned for April, May and June had to be cancelled. I have to say here, this is one of the first actions we took as it was becoming clear that travel and public gatherings would become limited, and we'd obviously got the thoughts and concerns of delegates and our training people in mind in cancelling these courses. But I do strongly suggest that you have a look at that relevant notice to exporters, which is 2020-07, to get an indication of all of the courses that were actually impacted. In line with our cancellation policy, as it says here, you're not going to be charged for the courses which we have cancelled. So I'm just wanted to make that clear for you. Suffice to say, we do understand the value you do place on information and training, and it's really important to you as businesses to keep you updated on your compliance arrangements within your businesses. So what we're doing is we're looking at alternative methods of delivery other than the classroom-based courses during this period. Now, many of you will be familiar with Adrian Bond, our resident training manager. And Adrian is doing a fantastic job at the moment, developing a range of critical training courses for this period, which he will be able to deliver online. You will be notified when these are all ready to be signed up for. The chances are, and I suspect, that they will be delivered in webinar format. So please plan ahead and look to see if you have that capability within your IT. And as always, look at the training bulletin on gov.uk for all the listings of courses, and we'll keep you up to date in that and via notices to exporters to tell you when these courses are going to become available again. Thank you. Next slide, please.
And although this isn't the main message of the webinar, I thought it would be appropriate to very briefly touch on the topic of the transition period mostly just to reassure this is still on our radar. The only thing that really needs to be said here is that the transition period is due to end on the 31st of December, and that remains our policy. You might have seen the chief negotiators, David Frost and Michel Barnier, had a call last week, and that round 2 of the future relationship negotiations began on Monday by video conference, and this will carry on for the rest of the week. In terms of implications for export controls and actions you should take, the main point I'd like to communicate is that in due course we will communicate more thoroughly about the requirements and provide guidance for you. We remain focused on ensuring that export controls operate effectively while trying to minimise burdens on exporters. And the final point really is that throughout the length of the transition period, the current export licence requirements will continue to apply, so everything sort of stays the same in that respect. And that's it from us, I believe. So next slide.
Great, thank you, Matt, thank you, Claire. A very good kind of overview there of what's going on at the moment. I'm just going to do another quick poll. We're going to move on to COVID impacts now. So this question is asking, what has the main impact of COVID-19 been on your business so far? Please pick the one which applies most. I'm sure a few of these apply to a few, but the one which applies most to you. The options are delays at customs, cash flow issues, staff off sick, decline in demand for our services, the rise in price of freight transport. So again, I'll just give people a few seconds to answer that question. And a quick note while you're doing that, we're getting loads and loads of questions in. It is an hour-long webinar, so we won't be able to get through everything when you get to the Q&A. But the speakers have said that they'll be happy to take things offline afterwards, and we'll be shortly providing contact details to that end. And yeah, you can also contact the Institute or the Open Text by email. We can forward things on as appropriate. But I shall now close the poll, or try to. So this is always an interesting question at the moment. The biggest impact is the decline in demand for services. That's not too much of a surprise. The price of freight transport is up there as well. That's an increase from previous webinars. Delays of customs cash flow issues are there as well, but also staff off sick, just on 9% at the end. So maybe companies are adjusting on that front. But I shall now hand back to Roger for the next part. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, William. It's very good of you. Thank you. Very interesting results there. Thank you, Claire and Matt, for giving us a good summary of the sort of things that the ECJU have been doing in response to COVID-19. And we thank you that you're doing everything you can to keep business going from an export control point of view. Now, we've already talked about PPE, and there was some interest in PPE in the questions that we received before the webinar. Just wanted to touch on 3 regulations that have come in the UK that cover PPE, and they're summarised on the next 2 slides. First of all, there are UK government restrictions on parallel export and hoarding. Now, parallel exporting and hoarding are defined on this slide. I'm not going to go through the whole lot, but suffice to say that if you are involved in those activities, you will recognise that. This, interestingly, is legislation that's brought in by the Department of Health and Social Care, so outside the remit of the ECJU, who we've heard from. I noticed when I went on the website that the list of applicable medicines is being updated frequently. So rather than being able to tell you what this legislation covers, it's changing on a frequent basis. I recommend that if this, or you think this might affect what you're doing, then you visit the website here and you see there's gov.uk guidance on exactly that subject. The guidance websites have got a very good title there, and you can read everything you need to read about that. Also, applicable to both this one and the next two, there is a lot of frequently asked questions and guidance, and there's a helpline as well, so that if you've got any questions about these or the other two things we're going to talk about in a moment, then there's a lot of information on the website for that. Next slide, please. The second one is a liberalising measure that's been brought in by HM Revenue and Customs, and that is that you need to pay no import duty and VAT on medical supplies, equipment and protective garments related to COVID-19 if you're importing them. Again, the details are on that guidance document there, available on gov.uk. And thirdly, personal protective equipment, there are limits on what can be exported or what requires a license to be exported. This again has been brought in by the Department of Health and Social Care, and it's particularly for economic operators who will temporarily need a license to export PPE outside the EU, EFTA member states and certain other territories. Again, there's a lot of detail on that website there. I was looking through the legislation earlier, and I noticed that it is the states where you don't need a license is quite extensive. So if you're exporting this sort of equipment within the European Union or most places within Europe and dependent territories, then you won't need an export license. But the details are all on that webpage there. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So we've looked at what's going on in the UK. I thought it would be valuable to look at what's happening around the world. And I did notice when we saw the number of people who are signed up for this webinar, that people are signed up from all around the world. So welcome to you, especially if you're joining in at a funny time of the day or night. There has been a worldwide response to COVID-19 in terms of regulations. I clearly, on a webinar like this, can't go through all of them, but I thought that it would be useful to steer you towards 3 resources that I thought would be useful to you. Now, clearly, the IOE website is full of resources. The IOE is running a number of masterclasses, which are free to members of the IOE, but also members of the ECP. So if you want to look at those and see which ones are relevant to you, you can view them, join in on them, or in fact they can be reviewed subsequently as recordings. So the IOE is a good resource for information, and we'll look at some of the details in a minute. In the meantime, I wanted to bring you to point out 3 particular bits of information. And the first one is what's known as a market access map from the International Trade, I've forgotten the name of it, the ITC. The ITC is a division of the United Nations, and it's the part of the United Nations that supports internationalization of small and medium enterprises. The website is available to all free of charge. What they're publishing is on a daily basis a map and listing of the things that are changing around the world in terms of regulations related to COVID. If you go on their website, you'll find, if you search for market access map, there's a special section on COVID-19. And what this shows you is the range of countries that are taking action, legislative action on COVID-19 equipment. There's a whole range of measures. Some of them are restrictive, some of them are liberalising. Some of them include import and export controls, some of them include taxation relief or additional taxation. It covers a huge range of goods, pharmaceutical products, respirators, personal protective equipment, masks and gloves, hand sanitizers, and other cleaning supplies, some food products. And something that's very important for us is that it also includes a range of regulatory bodies. So just as in the UK, those of us who are used to dealing with the ECJU might not have thought about dealing with the Department of Health and Social Care or with the HM Revenue and Customs. So it also tells you what the regulatory body is that is dealing with the new regulations. If you go on the website, you'll see that the first thing is that there's a map of the world showing which countries have enacted some sort of regulations. The second item is the latest news, the last 3 or 4 days worth of regulations that have changed. And then the third item, which is by far the most useful, is a long list of every country that's affected, and it tells you what the regulation is, what it covers, whether it's restricting or liberalising, and there's a link to a document that explains what that regulatory change is. So if you're dealing with any of the sort of equipment that they're talking about, then it's well worthwhile looking through that in detail. Now, because the situation is changing rapidly and because obviously they're updating it as best they can on a daily basis, I would not treat this as the be-all and end-all, but as a very good guide and useful tool in your toolbox for the research that you should be doing on a daily basis. Next slide, please. Second resource that I found useful was a webinar that was done by the Export Control Training Institute in the US a few days ago, entitled Anticipating the Unpredictable and What This Means for the Export World. And it was led by a chap called Timothy P. O'Toole from Miller and Chevalier. The key points that he made, that I picked out anyway, were again that the regulators involved in the changing in the regulations in America are not necessarily the ones that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Clearly, people are involved with with OFAC that's mentioned down here, but FEMA and CBP probably are less frequently referred to. So again, looking at agencies different from the ones that we're used to dealing with. The challenges that he highlighted are to the business model, and he picked on a couple that were highlighted to me. One was that, of course, with people working from home, then you need to make sure that any licenses you've got are applicable to people who are working from their home location rather than the office location. Now, it could well be that the licenses that you've got, whereby you're receiving controlled information, for example, could well be, could apply to people's home working. But if those people happen to live in a country other than the place of work, then you need to make sure make very clear that the license that you've got allows for that transfer of information from your office location to the home location of the people working on it. Another business model change he talked about was changes in companies that are responding to COVID-19 by let's say producing PPE equipment and so on and so forth. Now, if they're doing that, then of course it might well be that they're getting involved in the new regulations, which they're not used to. If you're making PPE equipment and you're supporting other countries, then you'll need to make sure that the license that you know what licenses you require to make those exports, and so on and so forth. And of course, related to both of those is any changes in the supply chain that might be affected by COVID-19. And so again, looking at all of those options. And finally, he talked about the risk of compromise to internal compliance programs, while management's eye is on the ball of COVID-19 and maintaining a company in a difficult economic and commercial time. Then there may be risks to internal compliance programs, and clearly that's something that we as export control professionals would be wanting to ensure doesn't happen. So I've provided the link to the video, which you might like to watch. Pick out of it the things that are relevant to you, but I thought it was very well done. The next slide, please. The third resource is a new magazine called Export Compliance Manager, and this is published by the publishers of World Export Control Review. Issue 1 came out last month and was free and is available if you write to the publishers. Issue 2 was issued just a couple of weeks or so ago, and both of them, and the new program is designed to address smart practice into day-to-day export compliance. And the reason I'm raising it here is because issue 2 has articles on compliance in the time of COVID-19. What you're seeing on the right there is the cover of issue 2. Now, a bit of a background, the subscription rates for the magazine are tailored to the size of your business. So if you're wanting multiple copies for multiple readers, then there are sliding scales of subscription rates. There was an introductory offer of reduced subscription rates, which expired a week or so ago, but it has been extended for members of the export control profession and to members of the Institute of Export to the end of April 2020. So the details of that are online at exportcompliancemanager.com. But if you want to know how they apply to you, the publisher, Mark Kusik, has said, write his email on here, and if you want to write to him, you can get more details as well. So visit the website or write an email to Mark. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the key role of export control specialists. Once again, looking at changes to your organisation's activities. We've talked about working from home. I've highlighted UK regulations, which there is a notice on the ECJU website to say that the UK regulations do allow home working. If you've got data that's subject to US regulations, then you might want to look at that very carefully to allow that to happen. And again, we've mentioned changes to the business, products and services, and the supply chain. My view is that export control staff are in a really strong position to help a company through these difficult times, because export control staff tend to have a really clear view of the sorts of technology and goods and software that a company is importing and exporting and is moving through its organization, and are also used to regulatory management and regulatory changes. So although these regulatory changes that might affect your company now might be outside your particular realm of experience, you have got the right mindset to help the legal department, the supply chain department, the exporting department to comply with the new regulations, to understand and comply with the regulations. And also the straightforward piece of work, clearly the ECJU changes that we've been hearing about, you need to communicate those through your organisation, and also to help them understand that the ECJU is an organisation just like every other organisation and is subject to COVID-19, and there may be things that it can't do quite as quickly as it intends to and would like to. So I think that there's a real role here for export control specialists in the organisation. Next slide, please. So what is the IOE and the ETP doing? Very briefly, Well, first of all, if you go on the website, you'll see that there is a free 3-month extension to the subscriptions for this year. This is to recognise the stresses and strains of COVID and the financial constraints that many of your employers may be under. There is a requirement for ECP members to meet certain CPD point targets, 100 points per year. Because a number of training courses have been, which were going to be live, have had to be cancelled, and although we're going to put some of those back online, it makes it slightly more difficult to meet those targets. We're reducing the number of CPD points from a target of 100 per year down to 60 per year. I would encourage everybody who's using that system to still try and get to 100 points, but the requirement is that you only need to get 60. As we already heard from William earlier, the technical helpline has been strengthened, and we're answering a lot of interesting questions from companies and organisations through the technical helpline. The jobs board is now available. It's free posting on the jobs board for people seeking jobs. And as we've already mentioned, the IOE and IT is making COVID-19 masterclasses webinars and recordings free to members of its own organisation and to the ECP. There are also open webinars that are available to everybody, and many of the IOE courses to do with exports are moving online. Next slide, please. So I think we've covered all those quite a wide-ranging and quite a detailed set of subjects, all the way from the ECJU response to COVID-19, other UK regulatory changes, particularly to do with PPE, worldwide regulatory changes, the key role of export control specialists, response from the ECP and IOE and IT, and now I'll pass back to William for the questions and answers.
Great, thank you, Roger. And just before we go into the Q&A, I'm just going to do one last poll, just trying to gauge, are you still able to dispatch and receive component parts or goods? Yes, but with delays, or no. While discussing that, we had a question come in from Mike, who's asked about how do I add CPD points for my ECP membership with the IOE. We did do a webinar on that recently, so Mike, if you can email admin@open2export.com, I can forward you to that particular webinar. On the Q&A, obviously we've not got loads of time, so we'll only be able to answer a few questions. But while the Q&A is going on, I will keep the contact slide for Claire and Matt up on the screen, which will be coming in a second, just so any questions you have for them, those are the contacts. Going to close that poll in just 5 seconds. Give people one last chance. Okay, well, I'm going to close that now. Unsurprisingly, there has been some delays for a lot of people, but actually quite a lot of people, 45% have been able to continue dispatching and receiving component parts and goods. So that's encouraging. So Anna, if you can move on to the contact slides. Okay, so those are the contacts for Claire and Matt there. First question comes from Thomas. Thomas asks, due to the current situation, will there be any changes for obtaining an original consignee undertaking? I think that's for you, Claire.
Okay, thanks, William. I'm just unmuting myself there. And thank you, Thomas, for that question. Yeah, it was one of the things that we obviously picked up on straight away, that we've got this requirement. We had this requirement to have wet signatures on consignee undertakings, and we recognised straight away that this was going to cause a problem because with everybody self-isolating, that just wouldn't be possible. What we've done is we've now provided the capability for electronic licenses to be accepted from your consignees and from your end users, so that this facilitates the delivery of your supporting export control license documentation. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Claire. We had a question in from Stephen, who's asked what is happening to ECGJU compliance audits during the lockdown. I think.
Yeah.
Claire,
Yeah, again on compliance audits, Matt covered some of that, covered a lot of it off. We issued a specific notice. Please, I would urge you to have a look at those notices about what we're doing. Obviously, our compliance program was a huge program. We visit hundreds of companies every year to work with you to ensure that you're understanding the controls, to ensure that you're compliant with the open general export licenses. It's also a route in for you to talk to somebody in the export control joint unit about any assistance you need. So we know the value of those visits. What we've done is to contact those that have got compliance visits in the pipeline, and we're setting up, the compliance unit is setting up remote visits with their client companies on a system, a platform that is compatible to both the ECJU and to their client companies. But obviously, compliance visits are a key to everything, and we want to maintain this service, and we must maintain this service. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Claire. And a question in from Jason, who's asked, how is COVID-19 impacting the timescale for the processing of export licenses?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Was that Jason asked that?
Yes, Jason.
Was that Jason? Yeah, that's an interesting one, Jason. Because in actual fact, what we're finding is that obviously we're a very, very busy organisation. We process something between 15 and 17,500 licence applications every year. We're always hugely busy, and I'm sure if you're a regular user of the licence service, you'll know that. Our standard turnaround times, our timescales are that we will process 70% within the 20 working days. What we're actually finding is that as a result of COVID-19, the numbers of applications that we're actually being able to get through and process far outstrip the licence applications that are coming in to the unit. So hopefully that gives you an indication that we're still working on these. We've got with less applications coming in, and we will get to your licenses as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Claire. And we've had a few questions as well just about the training courses. So one of them is from Martin, who said, we were signed up for the physical training courses. Could the team please advise when online training will be made available?
Yes, I want this to be made available as soon as possible, really. So yeah, thanks for that question. I know the value of all of those training courses and the excellent work that Adrian's been doing with you all, because he's been building those courses on the back of all this feedback that he's been getting from you to know exactly what you need to understand the controls and the licenses better. He is making good progress in developing online courses, and we're hoping that they will soon be available. I would hopefully, definitely within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have something that will come off the starting blocks there. But it's always a danger, isn't it? On these live chats, it's always a danger to give a timeline, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah, you don't want to sell yourself short.
Exactly. So, I mean, all I would say is that we are working on it, and you will be notified as soon as we can actually put something in the, you know, in the system for you.
Thank you, Claire. And one last question for Roger, just because we've not had one for Roger. Someone's asked about membership with the export control profession. Can you just say a little bit more about what criteria they are and how people can join?
Yes, again, quite a lot of information about membership on the Export Control Profession website. If you go to exportcontrolprofession.co.uk and click on the section on membership, there are currently 2 levels of membership. Associate membership for people with 3 years experience in export control or related subjects, and a full membership for people with 5 years or more experience. The prices are all there. What you need to do is to click on the apply for membership button, and it will send you a questionnaire to complete. It asks for references and a CV. You pass that in, and it will be evaluated by the Export Control Profession Board. And if you've put a convincing argument forward, then we will grant you membership.
Great, thank you, Roger. I think on that note, we'll have to start moving towards the conclusion of the webinar. It is 3 o'clock after all. We've had about kind of 80-90 questions come in, combined live and the pre-sent questions. So we'll do what we can to follow up with several of them on offline afterwards. And there's obviously Claire and Matt's contacts there, and there's the technical helpline with the Institute as well. But we will try to follow up where we can following this webinar. But if we could move just a few slides forwards to the upcoming webinar slide. Yes, so yep, just to let you know, our next webinar will be providing an update on what exporters and importers need to know in general about the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of support available during the crisis and what you can do to mitigate the impact of it. That's taking place on the 30th with Kevin Shakespeare from the Institute of Export and International Trade. You can find signed up details about that at open2export.com/webinars. Next slide, please. The Institute is continuing to support businesses through these trying times through our range of online training and support. This includes online training courses and masterclasses, international trade surgeries, which can be conducted over the phone, online qualifications on the UK Customs Academy and IOE, the technical helpline, daily bulletins bringing you all the key stories in trade, and the free articles and webinars on the Open to Export website. You can find out more information about all of this on export.org.uk, and don't forget that many of our training courses can be funded by government grants. Next, please. And finally, through these historic times, it's really important that we support each other and share information and wisdom around best practice in global trade. Membership with the Institute gives you a support network and wealth of information to ensure that you have everything you need to meet the challenges of global trade. And as mentioned earlier, we are extending existing memberships. We have extended existing memberships for a 3-month period free of charge to help people through this period. Benefits generally do include everything that's been mentioned before, but also industry recognition of your exporting credentials, a wealth of online information, and networking opportunities as well, hopefully further down the year. To find out more information about membership with the IOE, please do look at the site export.org.uk/membership. And our membership services team will always be happy to answer any questions you may have. But for now, just really want to say thank you to Claire, Matt, and Roger for today's webinar. For some fantastic presentations. And that's all from us today. I hope everyone stays safe and see you soon, hopefully. Goodbye.